Sorry for the slightly late start. I have an artist table, so it's like I'm going in a million directions at once. So, hello everybody. I am Jay from Lost Gamers Comic, lostgamerscomic.com. We do have an artist table, and this is my Japanese car culture panel. I might play around with the flow of this a little bit, because I'm still kind of nailing out the details. I do enjoy an interactive panel. So how many of you guys really know your stuff about cars? Good. That's a good start. That is completely historically accurate. Everything in there happened exactly as they show in the series. Okay. Anybody have any cool projects going on right now? Like any cars they're working on, or any fancy stuff I'm going to find out in the parking lot? What's that? I know. Trust me, I've become a Subaru guy, so I have a WRX that has half of it swapped to SDI, but the ass end still has the rust bubbles everywhere. So definitely not a garage queen yet. So okay, that's actually pretty good because I did this panel to kind of commiserate and hook up with car guys, but at the same time, that means there's not a lot of people in here that'll call me on my bullshit. So that's really good. That said, it is Japanese car culture, anime, art, and drift. We're going to do a little bit of do a little bit of a history background that I might skim through and then come back to. Kind of look at how anime has touched on cars. The big thing about it is Japan as a nation. I mean, any of you guys that grew up on Gundam and any of the even before Space Battleship Yamada, as far back as Speed Racer. The Japanese have had a big thing with machinery in general, mecha, space, spaceships, sci-fi, and cars kind of fit into that. I mean, there was, I don't know if you remember a couple years ago, one of the releases of the Honda Civic, the big thing was they designed it, the front end was designed based on the helmet of a Gundam. Yeah.
What year was that?
I don't remember. I want to say probably the early 2010s gen, maybe 2010, 2011. So the previous gen of what we have now. So that plays an influence, and on top of that, you have with the designers in the anime industry and everything. Speaking of coming back to Initial D, that series made such waves in the industry. You have fanboys that have come and gone from the industry, where you have incredibly detailed depictions of cars and automobiles in series that have nothing to do with it. A really good kind of primer example, a little obscure, I'm showing my age a bit. If anybody remembers the anime Golden Boy.
Yes.
2 episodes of Golden Boy, the Ferrari F40 in the second episode was immensely detailed for being on screen for 2 seconds. And the motorcycle in the 6th episode, exquisitely detailed to basically be a giant sex joke. And that's the thing. A series, nothing to do with cars, nothing to do with racing or anything. All that time spent on making, the detail put into those vehicles when it could have just been a blob of Keller in a roughly, sports car shape. And you see that come up over and over again in anime series. And I actually have some that are direct tributes from Initial D a little bit later. The whole import culture has kind of gone all over the world. And I like I said, I do it to commiserate because as we've gotten further, as time has gone on, if you remember back when, I loathe to say it, but I'm sure you guys watched. If you remember when Fast and the Furious came out, and then every 16-year-old with $500 bought the first piece of shit they could find, and you couldn't go through a night without hearing the fart pipe go up your road if you have a fairly busy street. It sucked, and we made fun of it. But at the same time, it started a whole new generation on, building cars, working on them, crashing them, and got them into those people then had auto racing on the mind. You saw the boom of import magazines, or even just in general, like the return of like American Muscle magazines. And then that, they cracked down on it, and then it died again. Now people just the newest, the youngest generation overall just doesn't care. It's cell phones and tablets and like the latest, the biggest, most expensive gadget. People wait in line for the newest iPhone, and then take an Uber home. So, and I mean, it's not just their fault. I mean, the I can't believe I'm using this term. The meta has shifted because more than just the mindset of people nowadays, but like, you had the crackdown from regulations. You had lobbying after those movies came out to like, to tone down that imagery. You had a lot of things happen. You had insurance go through the roof. Tires got more expensive exponentially. So it just became more and more unfriendly to own a vehicle when you're in that age when you're going to go out, buy a $500 car and stick every bolt-on part you can onto it. But from that you learn. I'm just a guy who's into cars. I built several. I worked on muscle cars before I got into imports. Like I said, I'm a Subaru guy now. I started with Hondas, probably like pretty much where everybody starts with the go-karts. And I got into racing semi-professionally. I got into rally. And so, and I'm a big anime fan. And I watched and I dug through the crap so you don't have to. So a quick history lesson. Basically, I'm not going to go through, usually I go through like every line of this. I'm going to kind of speed through it a bit. Basically, at the turn of the century, cars started coming into Japan. The Japanese have this thing where they basically, and this happens in my music panel, everything I can think of, they will take something, if they don't develop it directly in Japan, they'll take something Western, kind of pull it in, retool it, play with it, and then re-release it as something of their own. And that's basically what the whole automobile industry, the whole racing and everything started in that manner. They brought in a French car, and it took off, and they kind of broke it down, and then within a decade started releasing their own cars. So in 1907, they released the Tokori, which was the first all Japanese built car. Now, the interesting thing is Japan was one of the first countries in the world to put public buses into production. And that's that little omnibus in the upper right there. Looks like a wagon, or like a stagecoach wagon. That was actually put into use in Hiroshima. And then, of course, in the very early times, Daihatsu was actually the first car company that still somewhat exists today. I just want to give a little shout out to Soichiro Honda, obviously the founder of Honda, but this is like the dude who started everything over there. He's like the Carroll Shelby of Japan. So he started as a racer, injured himself, then became an engineer, founded Honda. Started by, I kid you not, like bolting engines to bicycles. So, kind of like the anti-hipster, I guess. And then, it went from there, and he actually started making motorcycle stuff, but literally he would just like slap an engine onto a bicycle. There was a little bit of pre-war stuff. Basically, the rest of the world got interested in Japan, started bringing cars over, and then got kicked out because of World War II. And one of the interesting notes is the first Japanese motorcycles were Maguro, and those came in about 1909, 1910, and Nissan hit during that time. Post-war, you started having companies come back in. The first all-electric vehicle was actually from Japan, and that was the Tama, and that's that little guy down there. Still didn't have a whole lot going on. They were still copying U.S. and Euro cars. Okay, so now we actually get into kind of the budding car culture, which is you have K cars coming to market. Which, does anybody not know what a K car is? Okay, a couple people. I guess I can start with this way. How many of you played Gran Turismo growing up? How many of you could only afford the cappuccino when you started? Yeah. That's a K car. It is basically a street legal go-kart with a shell of an automobile on it. They're tiny, they're low power, and the reason they do this is because a large population in a small area in Japan, they kind of push you towards this. The only equivalent we would really have over here is the smart car, but theirs are much nicer looking. So like they'll cut you a tax break. The way that the system works in Japan is kind of like the bigger the car, the more you pay for it, and the longer you keep it, increasingly you pay more in registration and taxes to have it. So the K car was kind of a way to get rid of that, and they will cut you a break for owning it. And since then, like they've messed around with it. I actually get into the next panel, and they got more powerful, more like sport tuned and everything. But the 60s are really where they started showing up. They were still copying European roadsters at the time. And like, it's basically now with the Mazda R360 and the Cosmo that the Miata kind of got started. Do we have any Miata guys in the audience? Yeah, there's always one. Every time I do this panel, I have to ask that because you guys are like the hardcore. Like, there's always that one dude that's overly enthusiastic about a Miata. Sometimes I wonder if is that because it's a girl, like they consider it, like people call it a girl's car, so you have to be like, yeah, I'm manly and I got a Miata. What of it?
It takes a manly man to not have a piece of break.
I'll tell you what though, if I got back into autocross, I would immediately buy one. It is the most fun you can have with the least amount of power behind a car. Yeah, but the FRSs actually, have over 150 horsepower. The Miatas are like this tiny engine in just a little mid-engine thing. It's super fun to drive, but you're not fast. You're just fun, and a lot of people don't understand that. What's that?
You think you're fast, you go like 6 inches off the ground.
Oh yeah, that's why people slam Civics but don't upgrade the engines.
No, they just slam Civics because they don't know what they're doing.
Well, yeah, there is that too. The fun ones I have are when people slam stuff like Lancers or WRXs, where that completely destroys the purpose of the car, completely throws off the handling of the car. But hey, man, it looks cool, mad tight JDM, yo. But yeah, I had to ask about the mods. I had this dude, like the second time I did this panel, come in and be like, "That's not where they started. They started in the '80s." I'm like, I know, but Mazda existed before the '80s, dude. Anyway, the late '60s is when you actually started getting cars for the masses, and that's really what made the popularity explode. And in the '60s, the Datsun Fairlady Z started. Speaking of, has anybody seen Wangan Midnight in here? Yes. If you haven't, and you do dig like the racing animes like Initial D and stuff, check it out. It is super cool. Basically, this guy goes insane while fixing up a Fairlady Z. It is like this crazy cursed car, and it is like super fast and everything. It's a really good series. It's made by the same people that made Initial D. And I'll get back to the Fairlady Z in a second about how like Japan touring cars had to like ban them from competing and stuff because they just destroyed everything. Also, late '60s, you started getting muscle car clones, and actually a smattering of muscle cars coming into Japan as imports themselves. Japan has a weird thing with Mustangs. They love their Mustangs. It's like the only muscle car from that time that is still like, people be like, oh yeah, and just for whatever reason they really dig the Mustang. Late '60s also started the Touring Car Championship, which I'll also cover in a second. Touring Car Championship is basically like the be-all, end-all for the manufacturers over there, and that spread out into like the ability to tune cars and so on and so forth. And in the '60s, as a fun fact, Honda won their first Formula One using a transverse engine. So if anybody ever worked on the old Hondas, like the D Series and the B Series, they rotated counterclockwise, which is different than or they rotate clockwise. They rotated opposite of every other vehicle at the time. And they have since changed away. And they're usually not seen out of Japan primarily due to safety regulations more than anything, especially in the modern day where gas and efficiency is a big deal. The main reason you don't see them is due to safety regulations. A lot of the reason you don't see a lot of the various tuning specs of cars we do get over here is due to them removing safety features or not having enough safety features to meet U.S. standards. I totally phoned this one in. About the 70s through the late 90s, you really saw the fruit of the touring car championship. Every manufacturer was desperately competing with each other to produce cars, and that trickled down onto the street. So you would have detuned version of the cars they would be racing in the touring car championship. And then street racers and people would take it to the track, would basically retune the cars to what they were using in the touring car championship, and that was kind of like the birth of street racing. And a lot of the cars in this time could really be brought up to spec just by unlocking the potential that was already in the car, and that's the whole point of tuning. But and the cars were built to handle it. Anything from you had the Supra, which good luck finding a Supra now, but you had the Supra, which dominated. You had massive ranges of Civics and Integras. You had of course the 8.6, the Corollas, before they turned into super family cars. And then you had the WRX and the Evo competing in rally against one another, and actually the Celica's competing in rally as well. And all those would get detuned versions for the street, which then, with the exception of the GTR, which is the GTR, would get primarily detuned versions for the street that would not, that then could be brought back up to spec. This is just my bemoaning of shitty cars nowadays. And you had the downfall, again, you had technology, you had massive, massive crackdowns on street racing, and not that I completely condone street racing, because for every group of guys that finds a deserted road leading up to a closed factory to do racing back and forth on, there is going to be two idiot kids that get on it on a residential road with cars parked along the side and people still out and about. So you had that, fun fact about that, with the Fast and the Furious movies, the reason, it was actually a lobbying thing that they shifted from primarily street racing to the buddy cop kind of action films that they became later. That was primarily due to behind the scenes lobbying and pushing to move away from that plot point because of what it was filtering out into young kids going out in street racing. So yeah, it's just basically moving away from being able, and even now, it's getting increasingly difficult to just buy a car and tune it yourself. You still have some makes and models that cater to that, but largely it's becoming increasingly difficult to actually get in there and do work on your own vehicle. And I have the Element on there because it is an absolutely hideous car. Who puts a curved window that makes no is completely asymmetrical? Oh, I'm sorry, the Cube, I'm sorry. It's been a long, long day.
Literally a flying break.
Oh, yeah. That is on the Versa frame, isn't it? What's up?
I saw some joke, someone put the other license plate, the organic makeup for sugar.
Oh. Oh my god. Though the only thing probably uglier than that thing is the stupid smart car. It's probably more dangerous than any fast car. Does anybody have a smart car in here? Good. Very good. Dude, I had someone that came in yeah. Alright, so a little bit of east versus west. Cars aren't kept as long in Japan, again, going back to the regulation thing. every year it costs a little more to keep that car. That's why for you guys that do work on cars, if you import JDM parts, that's primarily where it comes from. That's how you can get cheap low mileage motors out of Japan. Is they actually get rid of their cars a lot earlier. And due to road conditions is why they tend to have models that we don't get over. Like another reason we don't have they have models we don't get over here with like the stiffer suspension, the more sport tuned stuff, is because of the large amount of twisty mountain roads over there that, you know, you don't have to go out to look for it to blast your car down. They're just all around you. Japan models, one of the interesting things about them too is they tend to have more features on them, even on like Econobox cars. You know, for example, you had an Accord Type R over there, which we never even saw over here. And they would have things like heated seats in the early 90s and like touchscreen interfaces by like the late 90s, early 2000s. And like the folding heated mirrors and everything. Stuff that you'd never see, well, I mean, you see because kids bring them over here, but like would never come factory on, say, like a stock Civic over here because they were, even at the highest levels, they're still considered Econoboxes over here. They're just, you know, functional transportation with a little bit of a sporty edge. Other things you don't see over here is wagons of any style because Japan feels that we hate wagons. And damn, that screws me because I am a big aficionado of wagons. I have a WRX wagon. I can't get the stupid Lavorde wagon that the rest of the world gets. If anybody doesn't know about this, so they got rid of in the WRXs, they got rid of the wagon and the hatch. So you can only get the sedan now, and it's this big boat thing. So they made this wagon called the Lavorde wagon. It is the back end of a Legacy with the front end of a WRX STI. On the STI chassis and frame and suspension, and with the STI motor. And they're just like, nah, you guys don't like wagons over there. We're gonna give it to the rest of the world except for you. So this is my little bias that I'm pissed off about. But like, it is things like that. Just like, you know, we never had the Skyline until this last version. We never got the STI CVT transmission or anything like that. Dude, a double clutch transmission is awesome, especially for boost. Oh yeah, the CVT. I guess in that case, yeah, they considered that like it was a horrible marketing thing. They considered like the girlfriend edition of the STI, so you could buy it and get away with having it as a daily driver. I just wanted it for a fun novelty. Other things, the frame. If you've watched Initial D, they use the frame number and model code instead of the VIN to identify cars. That's where you get like the 86 from, because it's the AE86. Or like for you Honda guys, that's why they call them EGs, EFs, EKs. That they're using the frame number and model code. I'm not going over the timeline, you guys. I will have this up on my website, www.lostgamerscomic.com. Shameless plug. Just because it would take, you could have an entire like college course on this crap. So motorsports in Japan. So the basis of racing, started in the early 1900s. It started honestly, frankly, racing starts as soon as two people have cars. Someone's going to race it against each other. Ironically, it started because of if you guys know about racing, tuning and racing in America, a lot of it's street racing. A lot of it started because of prohibition. The rum runners would race their cars against each other. So in Japan, that started because of gambling. I can make comments, but I won't. But they got into international motorsports in the early 1900s. You have Subaru versus Mitsubishi in the rally. The touring car, I don't remember if I have the touring car slide here now. Let me just make sure before I rant on about it. Okay, good, I don't. So the Japanese Touring Car Championship, what that did was all the manufacturers got together and they would run their off-the-line models in these races against each other. And it was a big deal for them. And basically what started happening was originally the Fair Lady and then the Skyline just dominated everything. And literally pushed out all other competition to the point that they had to ban it from competing. And that is, from that point is where you actually get the Honda-Toyota rivalry, was from Japanese touring car. But it was basically what they would do is you had a 276 horsepower limit on the cars, and they would race them in basically stock form. To get around this and to one-up the other companies is where tuning began. What they would do is they would have their in-house tuning, like Mugen or TRD, have the car come off the line, take it down the street to their other on-factory premises, so it's still factory. It's not modified, it's not third-party, it's not, and tune it to, and tune it in every way they could to keep it looking and feeling as, like, kind of looking as stock as possible, but then trying to one-up the other manufacturers. And they originally put this 276 horsepower, quote-unquote, law into place to keep that from happening. And it was kind of it really wasn't a law, like, it turned out not to be a law, but like a gentleman's agreement, and no one paid attention to it. They would literally, again, they would take it down the street, put a stronger cam in the car, and then take it to the touring car championship. So, but the rivalries and the basis for the down-tuned cars were from the touring car championship. And then, of course, you have, Japanese more or less invented drift, downhill, and then they take, they were big in Formula One, especially Honda, and motorcycle racing as well, especially Honda. And then they're one of the big front runners for Formula E, which is the electric Formula One. I know they push it really hard, and they have a lot of they try to have a lot of the races in Japan. Just some of again, the OEM, the factory tuning companies and their counterparts. I don't know Suzuki's or Daihatsu's if they even have them, but the rest of them are just kind of like what you have lined up. You have Mugen, STI, the Mazda Speeds, TRD, Nismo, and then Ralliart. But rip the Lancer Evo at the moment. So drifting. Does anybody really not know what drifting is, or do we all have a pretty decent grasp of drifting? Because I could talk for hours, but let's be honest, when it comes to drifting and trying to get into the dynamics of drifting, anybody can sit on YouTube and watch videos. What's up?
It's the least efficient way to get to a corner.
Well, here's the fun part about that. Okay, so I will talk a little bit about drifting. It actually was not about the inefficiency it has now. It was actually originally designed to get through corners faster by motorcyclists. Going to my notes here a little bit. Oh, I should probably spell it right. So basically what happened was Kunimitsu Takahashi was doing motorcycle racing and was trying to find fastest ways through corners on a motorcycle. And then it became incredibly popular as an inefficient but stylish way in the Japanese touring car championships. And they played around with it to try to get the mix of both efficient and fast. And then Keiichi Tsuchiya, the Drift King, kind of went from there and really kind of took it into the stylism you see today. And if anybody, for those of you that are not particularly informed on it, basically what you're doing is, in terms of rear wheel vehicles, you're basically getting the back end to slide out in corners. So the original theory was, if you could slide it out, you could get straight faster and keep momentum. But basically, what you're doing is you're doing a controlled spin out to bring it around a corner and then recovering to continue forward. And yes, it can be done with more than just rear-wheel drive cars. Up in that upper left corner, there's this dude. His name is slipping my mind right now. He competes in drift tournaments in a front-wheel drive EF Civic. He is actually sponsored by Falcon and everything, and he does goes around and does tutorials on it. He started learning how to drift in like a 1980 automatic hatchback Civic. So he was able to drift front wheel and automatic using left foot braking, and which is where you are using both gas and brake at the same time, and techniques with the handbrake. So it can be done, but the preferred method is using a rear-wheel drive vehicle. I don't really cover much of this. This is kind of the enthusiast culture kind of began post-World War II. You had muscle cars over there. You had the Japanese rapidly developing these cars, and then the touring cars started, so you started having these down-tuned cars that could be bought by anybody. Though the biggest difference is where you had drag racing in America, you had both downhill and drag in Japan. Car culture in Japan until now, like up to current, is pretty similar to America. You'll have meets, you'll have areas throughout big cities that are known meeting areas. So come out, park your car, show it off, hang out with other drivers. And then maybe you'll take a drive around. Osaka is really big for it with the Wangan Loop, and there still are the what they call themselves the original JDM street racers down there, and they primarily drive Hondas around the loop. I actually have. I guess I'll do some video time. Well, okay, I'll cover the marks, and then I'll do some videos. So has everybody seen the marks on the right-hand side there on someone's car? What's up? Okay, cool. These were really big during the everything JDM era. They are. I'm trying to find my notes here. Basically, they are marks to symbol the top two. Or the top one, the top right that you mentioned is the Wakaba mark, and what that is that signifies a new driver. Be careful, I'm a new driver. The kind of slanged out term, slang, but the appropriated street racer thing is a new racer, a non-experienced, don't have a lot of wins, haven't raced much driver. The funny one is the other mark. So the Croatia mark, which is the two marks there, the old one and the new one, is has anybody ever seen that on someone's car? It was appropriated in the street racing circuit as the experienced driver, the out there and I'm a good driver, an experienced driver. There's a little bit of a mistranslation in that. It's not experienced driver, it's elderly driver. So anytime you get that kid in the riced out car with that mark on it because he's such a street racer, it doesn't mean what he thinks it means. It basically means I'm old and I can't drive very well because I am old. Be careful. It is the law decrees anybody 70 and over with anything that could affect their driving to display that mark. And then drivers over 75 have to display that mark. So yeah. But yeah, other than that, the bottom one's the Tokyo Auto Show. Pretty similar to a big show like the LA Auto Show. There's a mix of prototype cars, tuned cars, and then stuff that's coming out in the next, regular street models coming out in the next year. Another phoned-in panel, just so I can talk about it a little bit. I've touched on tuning. Basically, again, it is unlocking. It's basically unlocking performance on your vehicle above and beyond what comes off the factory line, but is not officially supported by the company, but is they built the tolerances into the vehicle by and large. And I mean, you can do that. There's ECU tuning, where you can actually take the computer of the car and retune. Put new tuning, how much fuel is being fed, when it gets so much air, what to do, and you have parameters that can be set to kind of change the characteristics of the car, to make it more aggressive or better fuel economy. Nowadays, in modern times, you just buy an add-on box like the Cobb access port or whatever car you have, and they have like off-the-shelf tune that you just put on, load it up, and it changes the parameters of your car, and that's all you have to do. In the old days, you had to take it to like a tuner and do dyno tuning, and you still have to do that for like really hardcore builds or like straight up racing builds. Other than that, you just have some of the manufacturers of aftermarket parts. Some of those are unfortunately no longer with us as the whole scene has kind of died down a bit. And that's it. It just comes from getting to know your car and unlocking the hidden potential in your vehicle. And if you're into that kind of thing, I guess dressing it up too. So street racing, hashiriya. Like in the US, it basically started as soon as motorized transport was available. Japan was gambling. Does anybody know about the Midnight Club? Okay, a little bit. Okay, what's up? Were you just saying that you do, or? Okay, cool. I didn't know if you had a question. All good. So the Midnight Club was like this legendary Japanese street racing gang kind of group. And they were most prominent, last couple decades, but I mean, they're pretty much gone now. They've been gone for a while. And what they would do is you had to get brought in, and the way they would find races and meetups is they would post an ad in classifieds with certain information that only other members would know, and then would have like a code phrase or a code word that was agreed upon in the last meetup that will be, letting those people know that that is the ad you have to follow to find where the next race is. And that's how they avoided getting caught for a long time. Eventually they did get caught, and then also went a little bit further and then willingly disbanded because there was an incident with a Bozozoku motorcycle gang, and it involved outsiders, like civilians, and getting hurt, and they decided to basically completely put it away after that, because that was like their agreement. But you'll still see Midnight Club like stickers and stuff. It doesn't mean anything anymore really, but it's still like a legendary thing from Japan. I covered the Wangan a little bit. Where like with Initial D you had primarily downhill mountain racing. The Wangan is all about speed, and it is a loop around Osaka. So I guess I'll share some video. Let's see. Okay. So this is, I'm just going to play a little clip from this. This is the street racing group from Osaka.
The Konjo, a 7.68 kilometer long loop of connected highways that encircle the city of Osaka. For most, it's their daily commute. For some, it's another noisy highway that runs through the middle of their neighborhood. But for the Konjo-zoku, it's the loop, where friendships and rivalries are formed. Welcome to their automotive playground.
カルチャー、大阪・関西の文化そのもの、いろんな車だけじゃなくいろんな人とのつながりだとかっていうのがずっと何十年にもわたって受け継がれてる場所なんで。
The Civic is as much a part of Konjo culture as the highway loop itself. The Kanjo-zoku explain why, out of the abundance of cars Japan is known for, this little economy car from Honda became their weapon of choice.
やっぱシビック魅力やね。速い、よく止まる、よく曲がる。まあ僕らももともとその FR の例えばまあ86レリンとかあんなも乗ったけど、もうこれはもう乗ったらもうやみつきになってまう車やね。だから魅力のある車やね。
ずっとシビックを見てきたわけですけど、乗って初めて。
Okay, so there you go, Civic. Someone called the Civic a seductive car. He goes on to talk about, which is actually really cool, about JDM, USDM, like parts. One of the really funny things he brings up is the weird, like, there's no pure anything anymore. I'm sure you know, like, JDM, like, for a while, the guys in America had the craze for JDM parts and would buy anything. It could be like a visor that's exactly the same with like different text on it, and will pay like 8 times the amount it's worth to get it over here. What would happen is they would bring these parts over and put them on their car. Then the Japanese guys would see what the Americans are doing and think they're US parts and buy back their own parts to put on the car. And this would just cycle around, and they would see these mixes of parts, go, oh man, that's such JDM so cool, that's USDM so cool. Meanwhile, they're just buying their own parts back each way. So like no one really knows like what's what anymore when they're doing these stylings. Let's see. Wait, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay. So styles and trends. Well, I have about 10 minutes left here. There's no such thing as rice in Japan. It's all personal expression. There's the Bipu style, which is basically the slamming the car and just like like the slamming the car, the negative camber, those big rims. And you have it, and each style is basically the different kinds of cars. Like VIP style is like the luxury, doing it with luxury sedans. K style is doing it with K cars. Cargo is that thing with doing it with the vans and putting the like the flares on minivans. A side piece of that is the ones where they had the vans and you open up the back and it has the big subs and neons everywhere. It's similar to our like audio contests over here, but they do like they do it in more of a both an aesthetic and sound way. If anybody saw Tokyo Drift, that dude that had the Incredible Hulk car is basically an homage to that. Bosozoku style. Does anybody know about this? Okay, some of you do. The upper left corner there, and I have some videos of it I'll show at the end. It is basically the closest you'll get to Japanese rice. It is like a Yakuza-inspired, ridiculous-looking cars. Did you have a question, man? Or are you just stretching? Okay, cool. Basically, you have like these crazy, like outlandish styles on cars. Giant pipes, the big, huge fender flares. These big like things. It's like if you gave a 5-year-old crayons and like, hey, make a car. Probably what you would get. And they get into it. It's like this weird Yakuza thing. Like the bottom left there, it's just a little picture, but like guys will go to these shows and they'll dress up as like old anime and old movie style Yakuza members and like cosplay next to their cars and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I kid you not. I will rush through it so you can see the videos, and I'll show you some of the anime videos too. Like Dekorata style is came from a 70s like B movie in Japan. It's where they take big rigs and light them up and make them all chromed out in this crazy like sci-fi looking thing.
That's cool, actually.
It's super cool. I think it's called like Hard Truck or something. There's the old 70s movies, and they featured this, and it took off. Another anime tie-in is there's an homage to it in Trigun. The guy that hijacks the train. That's what they're homaging is. That's why he has it covered in neon. His train's all neoned out. That's why. Just a few other. Speaking of, as you can see, they're now doing like the different styles with supercars over there. So they have like gold-plated supercars with undercarriage lighting, and then there's a little shot of like the rear van with the whole entertainment setup in it, and a little bit more Bosozoku style. Okay, I guess the only other ones I'll mention is like sleeper style is just to build a fast car that looks like stock, and all right, so car culture and anime, the other big part of this, which ironically for being part of my title is like 3 slides. But the point I was making with car culture and anime is you have direct ties to to automobile racing, to the car culture. You have Initial D of Wang and Midnight. Even as far back as like Speed Racer. That was what? Like the 50s? And one of the first syndicated anime was a racing anime with, sci-fi elements, obviously. Then you have stuff like Redline, which was futuristic. You know, you have EX Driver, and a new one, the next A-Class, if anybody gets a chance, I think it's probably on YouTube. It was a Mercedes-sponsored anime where these guys are driving around an A-Class Mercedes in Japan trying to find this legendary noodle cart. And the weird stuff that just, yeah. And just the weird stuff that keeps happening while they're chasing this noodle cart around. But yeah, the big thing to take away is with the car culture in anime is the love of racing, of automotive, of the machinery, of the engineering behind it is all over in anime, even if not direct. And it just kind of comes through on the pages. Some of the ones I bring up here is, has anybody read or watched Gunsmith Cats for you older crowd? There are entire chapters of that manga dedicated to her boss Mustang. Just because. Another one is stuff like City Hunter, Riding Bean, which actually Riding Bean led into Gunsmith Cats. Again, all about the cars, all about the automobiles, all about chases and just the machinery. Another fun one for you Eva fans was Misato's Renault. Crazy detail about that car in the manga. And again, even in the anime, it was on screen for all of it had to be under 5 minutes. And just the detail put into it for something that was such a throwaway item in the animation. Other than the time that she rolled it like 5 times because the city exploded again. But yeah, even still, you have Lupin and his Fiat 500. The creator of Oh My Goddess also did EX Driver and You're Under Arrest. Even though You're Under Arrest and the EX Driver, of course, were much more racing and automobile oriented. But even Oh My Goddess, which had was not a cop manga, was not anything to do with it. The main character Keiichi was going to school to be a motorcycle engineer, got into racing, and there was even racing in a slice of life, heartfelt romance anime manga. And that's the point I'm trying to get. Like I said, like I talked about the Golden Boy, where nothing to do with it, and it's just there. Hatsune Miku is Toyota sponsors the Vocaloids thing, and there's like cars done up with the Vocaloids, and every year there's a new racing Miku. Vocaloids don't have anything to do with racing, but there it is again. It's just something that is inextricably tied with the culture and with the subculture of anime in Japan. I have some fun clips here of and the waves that Initial D made, going through and going into as things went forward. Has anybody seen the anime School Rumble?
Yes.
Does anybody remember the fact that what is it? 10 minutes into the first episode? I don't think you're really.
男と呼ばれた男、このまま引き下がるわけにはいかねえぜ。うおー！天馬ちゃん！
Yeah. First episode. Oh, it gets better too. Has anybody seen Lucky Star?
Yes.
Another one. Moe anime, nothing to do with this.
おーい、交通安全か。姉さん、ハンドル握ると暴走するんですよ。鏡と司には人柱になってもらおう。
へえ、そうなんか。警官やのにな。あれ、おかしいな。向こうとはぐれてもった。
さあ、先生、違う道入ってます。先生、そこ4つです。無発だった。両方外れだったとは。
For those of you that watch the video, it's even better. And that's the legacy that has really created, and why I talk about the fact that like these have nothing to do with it. It's Lucky Star, for Christ's sake, and like all that time and energy spent in a little like Initial D parody in the anime. And there's actually a couple other animes that do that too, like Neko, also does a Initial D parody, and I'll do a quick. Let's see. So this is the next A class that I was talking about, for those of you that have not seen it. So there's the Mustang again. But,
走る都市伝説そういうの大好きあれは走る博物館さいや走る絶滅危惧種
絶対追いついてお願いじゃなきゃ最悪のまま今日の私が終わっちゃう19時になりました
So yeah, they're literally driving around the streets of Japan trying to get to this submarine stuff. And the whole thing is just the ridiculous things that keep happening in this Mercedes while they're having it. Like, it's a total clever ad for Mercedes, but it's a well-done, clever ad for Mercedes. So I will jump back to the PowerPoint real quick. So I will bring up Atasha style, which is the covering your car with anime stuff. Some of these are sponsored, but some of these like guys just do this, and it's super cool, but a little weird at the same time to think how much money they spent on putting Lucky Star characters on the side of their Civic. And I mean, that's just, it is a huge thing in Japan right now. And it's actually starting to come over here. I was at Anime Boston earlier at the beginning of this year. And someone had a BRZ with the Ava, like the nerve thing, like when the computer goes down and it makes the honeycomb all over the car, like breaking from the gray into the red. And then like Asuka on the roof. Because whatever. Last thing I'll touch on just real quick is video games. Again, you have the Initial D games. I'm sure most of you grew up playing Gran Turismo and then probably moved on to Forza. There are some drift-oriented games. If you really want to get hardcore, you can go to like iRacing and stuff. And I guess I will end with, since I promised. So this is Boso's Oku style.
Oh my god.
Why not? That's about all I can say. And like it's all open pipe and everything, that's why I'm not plugging the speakers back in. It's super loud. So yeah, for being a Japanese gangster thing, it really does look like you gave a kid crayons and said, here, make a car.
Holy crap,
Oh yeah.
There's someone here this weekend. I saw them when I got here today. They drove past my car in the parking lot, and the whole side of their car has like anime characters all over.
Yeah, it's done both professionally and amateurly, and it's really expensive to actually do.
It's the first time I've ever actually seen, especially a small con like this, like a local con. But, yeah.
I don't know, I've seen one wandering around Virginia Beach. I'm never able to really track it down, but where it's huge, like my neighborhood is full of show cars. So a car like that tends to wander into my neighborhood every now and again.
Huh. Well, it's probably here this weekend because I've never seen it anywhere else.
The love is true.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them come around. What's up?
This was fun.
Hold on. There's some YouTube video of them, like some of the lowriders trying to get out of the parking lot. It's funny to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're roadworthy, but barely. It's like watching the guys that slam Civics over here try to get up like the steep hills in the Northeast. Yeah, I've run into a couple near my house. I live in Pittsburgh, and we have some really like San Francisco level steep hills up there. I've had to pull a couple guys off from getting like beached on hills. We're at? Yeah. Okay. Thank you everybody for coming and sticking around. I hope it wasn't too terribly boring. Like I said, I'm more than happy to talk cars anytime. I'll be in the Artist Alley for the rest of the day.